Alrighty, thank you for that shout out from our sponsors.
No, you gotta send it to the sponsors.
I've never done this before.
You have. You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG.
Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss new player characters. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Jody, and with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague, Matt. Hey, new guy.
Hey, how do I fit in here? What is my role on this show, Jody?
Well, I think you're going to guide us through this discussion. On today's episode, we're going to focus on integrating a new player character into an ongoing narrative campaign. Matt, take us to the table.
All right, Jody. I don't know if you know this, but characters die with a relative level of frequency in Shadowdark.
Some players more than others.
Oh, come on, man. And in fact, for many of us, I think actually the very real possibility of death both makes game mastering and playing Shadowdark more engaging. Like raising the stakes has a meaningful effect on gameplay. And as a player, I really enjoy it. However, I recently had my favorite Shadowdark character I've played thus far die an ignominious death to some skeletons. The combat in question started suddenly with the skeletons rising out of some alcoves, as skeletons are wont to do. I'm fully good there. This is a party of 3 level 1 characters: a barbarian, aka pit fighter, a priest, and my beloved thief, against 4 skeletons. Now, to make matters worse, prior to delving, we had some time to roleplay in town, do some light character development. And my character, Hank the Human Thief, I didn't come running onto the page, as you like to say, Jody, but he had some personality, and I liked his vibe. Fast forward to the skeleton combat. It was the first room we explored, and a couple of nat 20s from the skeletons both brought our priest within inches of his life and ended up taking the life of my thief.
All right, folks, let's gather around the fire and pour one out for dear old Hank as he passed. And then our characters withdrew hastily from the dungeon. And there, lo, ahead of them, new guy. Who dis?
So that's what really we're talking about today is I don't want to focus on the fact that I like this character. That was me kind of playing this up. I did like this character, but it was a level 1 thief. The dude was not long for this world.
Yeah, he did. I'm going to defend myself here. He actively on the round before that drew the attention of your turn was like, hey, I want the skeleton to attack me. And boy, did he.
Yeah. Okay. So, I want to point out that I would have accepted any other number between 1 to 19.
Yeah, he would have been fine.
This was the problem, is that it was the 20 that really sort of infuriated me, because that basically assured that he wasn't making it.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about today, though, Jody, is this issue of introducing a new player character to an ongoing narrative story. And why we're talking about this is because it comes up a lot on the Shadowdark Discord and in many different discussions around OSR games in general is, well, with death being so common, how do you run a long-form game? Don't these new characters showing up all the time cheapen the narrative of the game? And I want to ask you this right off the top, because full disclosure, we weren't super far into this narrative, but we had arrived at these characters through a gauntlet.
Yeah.
And so there was some narrative inertia behind them, and then you gave us an opportunity to role play in town, which again kind of increased that narrative inertia and characterfulness of these characters. When this character died, what was your first thought? Because I know what my first thought was once I got over how extraordinarily angry I was at my GM for rolling a 20.
The worst guy ever. My first thought was, oh my God, this is going to be a TPK because the priest was already down. There's no healing. This barbarian, this is looking grim. Thankfully, he was successful on his next attack and cleaned things up. He also had taken a beating. So my first concern was I need to address those that are alive, which feels super callous. Like this is a very real, hey, be aware of it, GMs, unless you like this sort of thing and you are running the meat grinder and the this and the that, knowing that this character had some legs and some time to come on screen, there was an element of I need to deal with the characters that are alive and get them in or out of this situation. And then I do have a bit of a responsibility to get you back in the action as quick as possible. And there is a difference in you were 2 sessions old versus had you been 10 sessions old or 20 sessions old.
Yeah.
My reaction in that instance would have been very different. But what was your reaction to this ill-fated first room?
Yeah. My initial reaction was not the melodrama that I've been I know. I was bummed, but you know, like you said, only a couple of sessions really with this particular character, so wasn't beloved by the table or by me. So my first reaction was, okay, we went through a gauntlet, so I know I have this other character on deck. But I hadn't looked at that character's stats or ancestry or anything. So my first order of business was to make sure that I wasn't flippant about things. And this is actually really important because like you said, my final action was essentially trying to get a skeleton and successfully getting a skeleton to attack me. And this was a terrible idea. Statistically, I was very likely to be hit. And as a thief, I had very few hit points. But if you wouldn't have crit, I had a pretty good chance of not going to 0 hit points. So, and by that I mean I had about a 2/3 chance. So, so I was playing the odds a little bit and playing up the story of this character. And I thought if he lives, this will be a very cool narrative moment in what is only going to be a 3-session game.
Yeah.
So I was taking a big risk. I was taking a big swing. And so after that, I didn't want there to be a moment where I just kind of, did something flippant, like ripped up my character sheet or threw the, there's all these stories of, GMs taking people's character sheets and ripping them or whatever. And I didn't want to do any of that. And I knew that you weren't going to do something like that. But I think that's the first thing I want to kind of hit on is, character death is as meaningful or as not meaningful as you would like to make it, I guess. And everyone at the table, I think, had the same reaction, which was bummer, dude. But also there was a genuine sense of can't wait to see who the new guy is. Yeah. And so I figured out how much time I needed to have before I moved on, which turned out to be like about a minute and a half. And
I'll be inconsolable for like 30 seconds.
I kind of sat there for a little bit, watched the rest of the combat. I was engaged with the rest of the combat. I was engaged with the rest of the scene because I had started as a part of that scene, and I wanted to kind of finish as a part of that scene. And then, as soon as it was done, I was into my new character sheet. Mm-hmm. I went and grabbed a new character sheet, and I started figuring out who this new character was going to be, and realized very quickly, it's going to be a wizard. And from there, I realized, oh, we're in a wizard tower. All right, I've got a narrative in.
Yeah, it's a Matt Colville video from a long time ago, but he talks about, I think it's the breaking your player's heart. Oh man, I don't know what video it was. Apologies.
Well, we'll put it in the show notes.
See if we can find it.
Yeah.
He said some stuff over time. But this one was one of his players. He'd killed one of his friend's characters, and he was saying his friend kind of came to him and he was like trying to console him in the moment. Colville was as the GM was trying to console the player. And the player just told him like, let me just be sad for a few minutes and then be stoked about the new guy. And I think that rings really, really true. Honor the death of the character. So I tried. It was brief, but I did kind of describe the closing scene of the battle of, hey, Anders, that's the barbarian character's name. You now stand your priest ally just next to you, laying on the floor, seems stable, but is unconscious. And in front of you is the lifeless form of Hank, who, gave himself to turn the skeleton. What are you going to do? But like, give that acknowledgement, like give a beat to the, like, we all see the dead character.
Yeah. And I was appreciative of that. But I think when we're talking about Shadowdark, I want to get away from the dramatic elements and get to the practical ones.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what people, especially GMs, really want to know is, does the frequency of character death create a drag on the narrative story? Because if you're trying to have this like overarching, big, sweeping narrative, you can start to get into situations where why would a new level 1 character join the party?
Right.
And so we will also, I'm sure, talk about a relatively recent character death that happened in our Dolmenwood game. And in fact, 2 deaths that happened over a year into that narrative campaign. And the kind of difference between kind of session 2 with this character and session 22 or more.
Right.
So, but I think to start, the most important thing for me was to find a hook, and not like a funny voice or a mannerism or something like a character hook. I felt like it was my responsibility as a player to size up what I knew about the campaign world. You've given us these nice campaign primers that have a little bit of information about the world and a little bit of information about the different ancestries. And I felt like it was my responsibility, because you're running a game, right? And we're doing this mid-session.
Right.
I don't have time to go over and say, hey, excuse me, I'm rolling up this new character. Could you please take 10 minutes to kind of, roll through some ideas?
Yeah. Would it be better if I was from the Iron Hills or the Blue Hills? And
right. But I'm thinking about this for my motivation. What do you think? I didn't have time to do that. So I felt like it was my responsibility to find a hook into the narrative of the campaign, even if, and I don't want to say even if I didn't like it, but I needed to do my part. And I don't know what you think about that as far as like the role of the GM in this moment, because I want to stay in this mid-session zone. And what is the role of the GM? You said get the player back into the action as quick as possible, but I think someone might say, well, yeah, but like if you get someone back into the action as quick as possible, their character is just going to be some jamoke, hello, I am Steve of Thandendor, and I have a sword.
So yeah, I can jump there. So as I mentioned, my focus as a friend, emotionally, I wanted to be like, oh, Matt, that sucks, dude. Hank was cool. All right. Are we all good? Like, is everybody? I know not to do that. That breaks the immersion, and it puts the game in the wrong place. So my focus was on Anders, the guy who survived, and we awkwardly went to him looting this chamber, and then rolled on random loot tables and found the single best item I've ever seen generated from the level 0 to 3 loot table.
Wow.
Which got awkward very quickly. That, hey, dead guys, here's this great piece of gear. Comedically, that Anders
sorry, Jody, I have to stop you. You said dead guys. There was only one dead guy.
Sorry.
And it was me.
Respect the space. As far bodies, 2 bodies. One living, one non.
Sure.
So the point, though, I want to eventually get to is I knew my job was to find a place narratively and also geographically to get the party to where it was conceivable that a new person could wander into the scene. So I nudged gently and used my deceptive GM powers to suggest that maybe a hasty withdrawal. You're not far into the dungeon. Gosh, look at the crawling clock. You're running out of time.
Literally, if you look out of the hallway, you can see the front door.
The light from the afternoon sun glistening not far from you. Perhaps withdrawing from this antediluvian chamber of horrors would be a good idea with your unconscious thief.
Perhaps your auspicious start should be a warning to delve deeper.
You might need somebody else. So there was, joking aside, there was that kind of nudge and encouragement to get to somewhere in the game world that would allow this. And I thought you did a nice job of, as you guys are starting your walk of shame back to town, up runs a dwarf and holding a book and a wand. And
this is an opportunity for me to talk about what I see as the kind of two different ways this could have gone. And I think you did a good job in sort of making the path of least friction the one to leave the dungeon, which was narratively also the path of least friction. But I think that the player was feeling like they needed an out. Like they didn't really know what the best option was, because there's this big question mark of this character that just died and this player who's sitting there not playing the game. If you have thoughtful players and a thoughtful GM, everyone's going to be kind of working together to figure out, when's the new guy going to show up, right? Paying last rites and respects to the dead, nominally in the case of the two other party members, but
they did go through your pockets. That was nice.
It was nice. But the thing that I wanted to kind of illuminate here is that you gave an out, and my responsibility was to make a character, right? But also, and I said this before, I knew that we were in a wizard tower, and we didn't have a wizard in the party. And I don't know if some people would call this metagaming, but the character I rolled up had great stats for a wizard, and it made sense to make him a wizard. And could have been something else. Yep, actually has really good stats all around. But the reason I went with wizard was in no small part due to the fact that I knew there would be an immediate in. And then, because we had just run a gauntlet, I had the kind of meta knowledge that this new character would have been with the group that escaped the gauntlet. And so I just kind of came up with this idea, very simple. This dude heard about their journey to this ruined wizard's tower. He was interested, which meant that ultimately this character is probably going to be pretty impulsive and curious. And
good traits for an adventurer to have.
And good traits for an adventurer to have. And then my third and final kind of piece is I do try and find like a character hook if I need to generate a character quickly. And for this guy, it's his books. I just said, he's got books. He's a wizard. He's got books. They're nowhere on his character sheet, but they're on the model, and that's
good enough.
That's good enough for me. And so I just went with that, and it ended up working out pretty well. But I wanted to ask you, you tend to like a more curated game.
Mm-hmm.
And so was there any trepidation on your part about handing over the reins that much? Because I could have come in with, Waffles the Syruper or something and just been like a total and complete, rando character, like, hello, I am Gallstaff, Sorcerer of Light.
Eventually you will be. So why did you shoot it into the darkness? So the question there is, I'm going to give you a weird answer of no, you wouldn't. Like, you wouldn't have done that. Right. And the people I choose to play with generally wouldn't do that. And if they did, I think we'd all feel okay kind of taking a step back and be like, what are we doing here? What are you thinking? This was a curveball. Pause for a sec. Why are we Waffles the Syruper? It's not a common name in these parts. Let's pause on that one. I want to stress a couple things. One, the gauntlet. The gauntlet paid some meaningful dividends here.
Oh, yeah. Very much so.
That was planned. Knowing that I wanted to do a narrative, knowing that the narrative was only going to go 2 or 3 sessions, one of the benefits of running a gauntlet that I was hopeful for was if a level 1 character fell, because there's no arguing that level 1 characters are fragile. Wizards and thieves in particular, very quick to fall. So having a way for you as a player not to have to do the meta knowledge dance. We know how we got here. We know what's happened. No, a group of people came into town after this gauntlet. There is an assumed invisible group there. It's not one-to-one characters. We had a group, kind of is how I run a gauntlet, that there is a group of people. It's which characters on stage at a given moment is the face of that player's group, if you will. So that paid a lot of dividends, and I don't want to diminish that. And then just trusting your players and giving them the information they need to make an informed decision. That role play scene that we started our second session with, in part, was just to build some credit, some narrative.
It was just
gravitas.
Shared experience.
Yeah,
right?
some shared time, some sense of what things are like.
That also paid huge dividends too.
Also, it ran a little longer than I wanted it to.
Well, I mean, you've got three players who literally you could have sat there for 2 hours and we would have just happily just role-played in character, doing funny voices and talking about, how much we hated the guy who was cheating everyone in 3-card Monty. So,
and I think there's a value, though, that I don't want to bypass of, I am often as a GM leaving on-ramps and off-ramps and little seeds of information, and if a player never picks one of them up, that's fine. Or if in this case, they choose to go, hey, they all talked to that really weird wizard last night. It seems like word would have got around. I could have definitely heard about that. That's just playing in the world I gave you. You are taking the offerings that I laid along the way.
So I totally agree that the leaving of breadcrumbs is super important, even if they're not super, super relevant at that moment. I also think that there's some amount of this conversation around, again, narrative campaigns and how character deaths affect them, that there is a need when you create a new character mid-session or for the beginning of the next session, when you're in the middle of a narrative campaign like Shadowdark, there's a real question of what level does that character come back as?
Sure.
Because I want to move a little bit to talking more about what would happen if a character or multiple characters died after many, many sessions of a very complicated and deep story, which I think the campaign that you're running already has, but it has it in a much different way. So I don't want to cheapen the game that you're running.
No, but when
you're 20 plus sessions into a game, there's just a different amount of information that's been developed, a different amount of story that's been developed. So what I wanted to ask was, you've been a player in this long-running Dolmenwood game, and you've had a couple of characters die. One that died very early in the game, one that died, and maybe in the tens to early teens of sessions. And then luckily, your character that you came back with, your third character, has been very, very interested in self-preservation and has almost not even come close to death. But recently we had a couple of important characters, one who'd been around from the beginning, who died. And I wanted to get your take on, when that happened, what were you thinking about integrating new characters? And we should talk about like some of the stumbling blocks, because I don't think it's been totally seamless, but I also don't think it's created the kinds of friction that a lot of people would worry about.
Yeah. From my own experience with my own character passing, the second character I lost in that campaign, that elf fighter, that one was one of the, not hard to deal with, that's selling it too hard, but it was one of the more, I had to take a step back. And I think the whole group did. That character had, both in part personality-wise and in part how I was playing him, had kind of become the leader of the group. He was a very yes and kind of character, in the sense of he was down for adventure. And as a fighter, I played him as an elven fighter who was maximally overconfident in his own abilities, and probably to some degree got him killed in the end. Also, just bad luck because it's going to happen on a flat math game with low hit points. And that was interesting to watch the group kind of have to recalibrate afterwards. That group dynamic's really important. These last two characters that passed, that group dynamic was important, but it was a lot easier in a way because they had also, one of them had very much kind of othered himself from the party just by the arc that character had been following. And it was, the stakes were clear for that guy from jump, that the things he is dealing with are way above his pay grade. This other character, though, who had been there from jump, there was an emotional investment and I checked in with the person to be like, hey, I'm really sorry, man, that your character died. That was rough. However, again, it was given in both instances, there was an acknowledgement. And I think this is important, even in the quick example I gave with Hank the Thief, of at least acknowledge the guy's body is laying there. These characters got bigger kind of send-offs and have been referenced since, and still their presence looms in the campaign. They still have a role to play, even if they're not being actively played. And I think honoring those levels, time at the table, is really powerful and is a compelling and interesting narrative. It is funny, and I will say, and I think a lot of players will do this, and I think it's something as a GM that's worth being aware of and steering into, is the reaction character is probably going to go a very different direction.
Yes.
And you want to almost help the player go in this new direction. You want to give them some on-ramps and some onboards. And in as much as my fighter elf was self-assured and a take charge and was willing to be the face and take the lead of the party, my new guy is maximally, nope, I do not want to chew through another character very quickly. So he is self-interested, and his stats started telling me a weird story and became this fun, but he has no interest in telling the party what to do. And it was interesting for a little bit because people would look at me and I'd go, I shrug. Like, I have no voice here. I don't.
Well, so, I mean, your character in Dolmenwood can literally turn into a cat and can't speak. So
yeah,
it's pretty convenient
just
for
I'm a cat. Out. Yeah, my first session as him, I was just a cat. And
yeah, you want to talk about maximally concerning for a GM when your new player character shows up and in the world of Dolmenwood, there are anthropomorphic cat people who are much more like the Cheshire Cat in like Alice in Wonderland kind of vibe, mixed with Puss in Boots, more Puss in Boots than Cheshire Cat, but like that same kind of like fey kind of strangeness. But they can turn into a Cheshire Cat and kind of cruise around. And I was very worried because you didn't speak in character for basically the whole session, and you didn't speak just really at all. And that was like, you got across that kind of annoying part of cats where they won't tell you what's going on extremely well. And so well done there. But also there was a part of me that was just worried for a fellow player and a friend who I didn't know how to read the situation, but I trusted you to kind of just let it ride, and I figured you knew what you were doing.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm sorry. I never knew that. No, I was just being unsure because I randomly rolled up a character, and my only criteria was like, I'm not playing another elven fighter. I know that, but whatever I roll up, I'll play that. And so rolled up this Grimalkin, this anthropomorphic cat guy, which is so far out of my comfort zone, and went, all right, well, that's what I'm playing. And my point of reference, much like you were talking about earlier with your Dwarven Wizard, of what are my reference points? Well, I know what cats are like. I can be cat, and I know there's another player at the table who loves cats, and her character will love cats. Her character loves animals. She's about to get herself a pet cat. And that's basically become this character's arc, is he is by no means her pet cat, but he absolutely leverages that. So again, it's that thing of, you gave me the space to integrate myself into the game. My plan immediately was, okay, I'm going to use my cat character to ingratiate myself to my friend who is a cat person, and her character will like having a cat. So that will work great. And I'll just do that and then let the character find their way into the bigger narrative. And pretty quickly you gave me, once we started getting a sense of who this guy was, you started giving me some hooks to hang on to. Your choice of like, hey, I'm going to come back with this wizard. It is going to be the easiest thing in the world to go, you're in a crumbling wizard tower. Hey, here's wizardy stuff. It literally has already happened. Your guy's one encounter since then has already produced wizardy stuff that he was valuable in knowing. So there, like you're saying, there's an interesting dichotomy here. I think that we have a luxury of GM brain and player brain, and going as a player, I'm still a GM. I know how the story has to unfold. And I think it's really important for the GM and the player to take some ownership, kind of as you're saying, of helping get this new person back in.
Yeah, and I want to actually highlight one thing that as you were saying or telling the story of how this character kind of came to be, I was remembering that when that character, quote unquote, walked on stage, there wasn't really, you didn't really have a quote unquote backstory, as so many Shadow Dark characters do not, right? Because they're not long for this world. And on the one hand, that can feel a little bit uncomfortable as a player because you don't really know where to go.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that we've done and we continue to do is we continue to use dice rolls and also just questions to determine not just what your character Tom knows or what he was up to, but also like things about the world. And it has become, Tom knows some things because of some experiences he had before he was a part of this party that we didn't know when he walked on stage. And so one of the things that I also think is key to Shadow Dark is that surprise, like learning things through play,
mm-hmm.
and being comfortable as a player with this character has roots in the world. I just don't know them yet. And I think as a GM, you can tell players, hey, you don't need to know how this character is deeply enmeshed in the story. I'm going to give you opportunities to make an intelligence roll. Let's see if you rolled like a natural 20 more than once on some checks about this witch faction. Right. And this happened many sessions into this character's existence. And suddenly it became clear just by the rolls of the dice that there was this faction that this character knew a lot about. And so I gave you a little vignette that kind of explained that backstory and kind of hopefully gave you a little bit of stuff to kind of chew on and come back to in future sessions if it comes up. But that was all extemporaneously done at the table, and it was all done through looking at listening to the dice.
Yeah.
And before that, we definitely came up with some ways for Tom to be grounded in the setting. And I think that's important, but I also think you can try too much to ground a character in the setting. And I think that's what people who are maybe coming from more, long form narrative games where there's an assumption that characters are going to live, 5th edition being the kind of the pinnacle of that.
Right.
But, there's this other game, Jody, that you have some experience with where characters are not long for this world, but it's a long form narrative storytelling game, and that's Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and you've played through. You played a fair bit of Call of Cthulhu, and you played through the Horror on the Orient Express.
I did. I had the luxury of doing darn near all of it. We did all of the side campaigns where you go time jumping. I opted out from one of those, so I think I never went to ancient Rome. But everywhere else, spoilers. Oh my god. If you didn't know, sorry. There's some weird time jumping flashbacks, and actually I want to come back to the idea of flashbacks and forwards and things. As a tool that's valuable here in integrating a new character. But yeah, Call of Cthulhu, holy cow. As a Call of Cthulhu character, I found an answer. Oh god.
Right, and then your brain dribbles out your ears. But you played in this long form campaign and characters died. Correct?
They did, and it was hard. Right, funny enough.
Yeah, how I've never actually asked you this, but how did your keeper, your GM, integrate new characters? I'm sure it was difficult to integrate new characters, but how did you find that? Because that actually seems like a whole level different, because once you're at a certain point in a Call of Cthulhu campaign, all the characters sort of collectively know things that there's no reason for some random, schmo on the side of the road to know. So how, and there's a lot of narrative heavy lifting you got to do. So I'm interested to hear how that went.
So there's an element that you've embraced as well of avoid the opening conversation. Try and fast forward the beat where new character literally meets existing party. Get through that. Hello, I am Gallstaff, Sorcerer Light. Well, I am a gray elf. And skip that. And then let the players on kind of a meta or above table way understand, hey, what are you all sharing with each other? What do you know? Now, for the Call of Cthulhu campaign, one of the things that was done that was really nice was if your character died, when the new character came in, the question was, what connection did they have to either the quest giver that begins that campaign or your last character? They would have had some connection. One of the joys of Call of Cthulhu that it has is an out that kind of classic fantasy games, even with narratives, doesn't, is Call of Cthulhu is, of course, a game of exploration and a game of investigation. So you're going to go talk to lots of people. So it's easy to pull one of those threads and say, hey, player, where's the point you want to draw in from? Also, Call of Cthulhu characters are complex enough that mid-session bringing one in is not super viable. Admittedly, also that campaign was during the pandemic, and so we were playing online in 2 to 3 hour chunks. So when a character died, it was usually mid-session. It wasn't right in the initial beat. And then they would show up next session with their new person. So there was some transition time where the GM could kind of talk to you about like, hey, which background person did you know? And then you would just assume as a player, well, I have some information from, Colonel Mustard, and he told me about the wrench and in the library right. and look out for Mrs. Plum, and okay, we're good. So you could kind of fast forward through that, getting that person back up to speed with, and now we can play and we can get back in. It was unfortunate. One of the players, though, the character they lost kind of 2/3 the way through, they'd really connected with, and we all really liked that character. And that loss was felt all the way to the end. It always did kind of feel like a proxy, like, and this is the other guy who's with us.
Right.
Thankfully, that character had a connection to the old character, so there was a way to kind of pull that memory forward. So there's, again, it's those, give some threads, give some tea leaves, some olive branches to pull on. In that, though, you've adopted a technique that I think is really cool, and you use it for characters that are alive, but you've also used it for off-screen characters. Sure. Of these vignettes, these separate camera moves. So the character that we just talked about passing away, that he had been with us from the jump and he died recently, or as far as we know is dead, or that character is not getting played in the immediate anyway. You went an interesting direction of continuing his story, even though it's not that character. I think you should share that again as a way of honoring in a long form campaign. How do you give the player the chance to play at the table with their new person and find them, but at the same time honor that time that character had? And this can be overdone, but I think what you've been right. doing is kind of cool, and I think it's worth sharing as a tool in the tool bag.
Yeah, so I'll kind of go over two different ways that I do this, but I have really adopted vignettes and flashbacks as a mode of storytelling. And Matt Colville gave me this idea originally, and I've adopted it to my own style, as we all do. But what I did after this character died is we play every other week on Friday nights in this Dolmenwood game. And every Saturday morning at 8 a.m., a follow-up email goes out. And it always has some kind of recap, usually in a narrative form. For instance, the last one I sent out was a narrative that one of the characters that you'd met during that session was writing about, like from the future in a book about the party's exploits, which might end up being kind of a cool thing later. I don't know. I was kind of it was an interesting narrative thing to do.
It's a breadcrumb for you.
Exactly. So long story short, I sent out these emails, and the one that I sent out after this character died was exclusively focused on a scene that the party would not have been able to see. It was a cinematic technique where, you know, it's dramatic irony, right? Like the audience, the players know something their characters don't about the situation in the world. Like, is that dramatic irony? Am I using that correctly?
You are. That was it. Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
my God.
Look at that. Somewhere your 10th grade English teacher's thrilled.
So the scene in question gave some closure to some of the questions that were left unanswered. I gave this recap through this vehicle that is consistent every Saturday morning, and I just kind of gave some closure.
So I want to point out in that, and it works really well. It is, I can say on the player side of things, it has felt not good because, you know, you got to imagine after 20 sessions and we're playing for 4-ish hours, you know, that's a lot of time spent with this character, this imaginary person. That's a long time. So there is a loss there, but it also is really nice to see, hey, there's this story, there's this thought given, this time. And sometimes we've had a few characters where, yeah, they're gone, but like we get little glimpses of whatever's happening to them. That's been interesting. All of these stories, though, there is a weird Achilles heel that can derail a lot of this. And before a single die is rolled, before a single session has been played, can make this moment harder to navigate, can derail the campaign. And this is kind of controversial and is also, I know, a little bit of a hot button for you, Matt.
Yeah.
The fully developed backstory.
Sure.
You mentioned that your new dwarven wizard showed up and you went, books, impulsive, wizardy, curious guy. Cool, go. And on he ran. The wizard that we talked about in our long form campaign who passed was not much more than a silly voice, and that player really wanted to be a necromancer. And that was kind of all we started with, and was like, goat dude in the woods wants to be a necromancer and has a very weird prepubescent goat voice. That was it. And then evolved or devolved. So yeah, the 8-page backstory, the fully formed character showing up before you've ever played, I think in many ways causes part of this problem. If your characters and you have spent hours and hours and hours developing these characters, this is my gripe with Session Zeros, where we spent 2 hours hanging out together to intricately craft everybody's backstory. Wow, that's really unsatisfying then if that character dies. It really does leave the story unfinished. You know, and I think if you are running that kind of game, then yeah, you are on the hook a little bit for honoring that time and honoring that agreement.
Totally.
Or your players being aware of, like, you may have to rack this and do it again. And that, I don't know if I have much of an answer to that one. Have never been and am still not a big proponent of a elaborate backstory. I think it reduces opportunities at the table. I don't think it adds opportunities. I think it reduces them. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that about the backstory and how the elaborate backstory, and I'm not even being flippant. I know there are games. I have watched enough Critical Role to know there are games that really benefit and shine and sing because of these backstories. Those games do tend towards the heroic, and character deaths are few and far between.
That's one of the hard things to sell 5th edition or other heroic, fantasy RPGs. It's hard to sell players that like those styles of games where character death is not likely, or if it is on the table, there's lots of mitigating factors, right? One of the things that you've done really well in these mini campaigns that I will take when I eventually start a new narrative campaign is you aren't playing with kid gloves. You killed my
numbered fight.
Yeah, you didn't kill my character. My character died.
I rolled a 20. Give me credit.
Yeah, there you go. So it's like character death isn't on the table, and Shadowdark is swingy, especially at low levels. However, you are not out to get us, and there's not a sense that the game or the game master or even the dungeon itself like hates the players in a way that feels unsporting. And I think we say this a lot on the show, this like term unsporting, and it's very nebulous, but I find that, and this is maybe my spicy take, and I'm getting a little far afield from your backstory, but I'm getting on my own little hobby horse here. I just feel like when we're talking about Shadowdark and other OSR games, we're talking about quote unquote lethality. There is this sense that like the more character deaths, not even the better, just the more authentic the game is. And I just like fundamentally disagree that characters dying is the same as like, or provides the same gravitas as just the fear of death.
Yeah.
If no characters ever die, then maybe the characters lose their fear in death. But I just don't fundamentally agree that you need characters to die in order for your game to have some kind of meaning, insofar as like you're adhering to the principles of the old school Renaissance. Like I just don't, I don't know. That drives me kind of bonkers because it then perpetuates this strange narrative that these games are all about characters dying, and then people come in and they're worried because all they've heard about Shadowdark and other OSR games is that they're lethal. And it's like, no, that's not what these games are. And there's lots of people who push back on this, and I appreciate it. While I think that the over-reliance or the overemphasis on huge backstories is not good for the kind of game that Shadowdark wants to be, I also think that like a super high lethality, just for the purposes of having lots of character deaths, also undercuts the kind of game that Shadowdark wants to be. I will get off my soapbox. Jody, weigh in. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
I appreciate it, and I'm glad I got a ticket. My wife also did, because she had a very poignant, at the very first one of these little micro arcs, she said, hey, we're playing Shadowdark. Yeah. She said, we're going to play like a 3 or 4 session arc. Said, yes. She said, I don't want to play a new character every session. And that's fair. It's like, so how's that going to work? I went, that's a totally fair question.
Yes.
And cards on the table. Like I got to be forthright, got to show the goods here, be honest with you as a listener. I've been holding something back that I'll share. For these, I allow max hit points. Your character gets max hit points, go. And that's a very conscious choice on my part, because I don't have any desire in just chewing through characters here. So at least give them the 1 hit point character. Like, let's give them a benefit of a doubt. Let's give them a 50-50 shot, at least for thieves and wizards, that they can take a D6 hit, as long as I don't roll a critical again. So that's a very real concern, though, right? Of the like, hey, isn't it cool to chew through these characters? If all you're doing is dungeon crawling, maybe, and the next room always has another person waiting to jump in and join the party, maybe, that might be fun. Our Sunday sessions are frankly a little bit that way, where monthly dungeon crawls are kind of that way. But it's a really valid concern of like, we're running this old school style game, so we're just going to die left and right. No, because like we kind of started with, and I think this is maybe where we can kind of tidy this thing up to get to some closing ideas, is because we're going to play in a collaborative sense. We're going to give our players, as GMs, we're going to give them a story they can connect to. And as players, they're going to play smart, knowing that there are no death saves, knowing that the death timers go by quick, knowing that they don't have a lot of hit points at first level. Once those things are in place and we have that agreement, I think we can move forward with appropriate fear and respect, and also the opportunity for fabulous narratives. All right, and with that said, we're going to take a break, hear from our sponsors, and come back and wrap this thing up.
Dungeon Master Diaries is brought to you by the Friendly Ghost Mattress Company. Are you alone in the dark? Are you starting to get that nagging feeling that you're probably going to need to spend the night in this hellish place? Do you need an easy-to-carry bed that only takes up a single slot? Well, the Friendly Ghost Mattress Company is here to help. With their patented foam foldable mattress, you can unwrap, lay down, conk out, even in the dark, dank depths of the dungeon. Jody, you've been sleeping on a Friendly Ghost mattress for some time now. Talk to me about the experience of laying down on what I can only imagine is like a cloud.
It's like a warm summer's day. It's like spring in the Feywild. Lilacs, lavender, country breezes. Mom, is that you?
Monsters won't have a chance of hearing you either because these mattresses are made from the cushiest foam possible. So you get a full night's rest without the worry of random encounters. Jody, what firmness level are you?
Soft like a downy morn.
You heard it here first, folks. Get your free trial of a Friendly Ghost mattress using the special code DMD and also get 20% off your purchase if you decide to go with that mattress. Remember, you get a whole month of delving to try out your new mattress. You can sleep on it and you can even return it if it's a little bloody. The Friendly Ghost Mattress Company for all your dungeon sleeping needs.
All right, welcome back. Let's bring this topic fully to the light with a few takeaways. So Matt and I had a rambling discussion here. Matt, what's your first takeaway from this episode?
All right, so I actually want to give everybody kind of a freebie that I wanted to bring up in our discussion, but I didn't really have an avenue to do so. Here's just a really easy way to tie a character in after a death, and that is to have the new character connected to the dead character, and specifically want them to avenge the dead character's death. If that works for your campaign, it's kind of an easy way to tie this character in immediately. They have an initial goal, and if it works for you, there you go. Take it or leave it.
I'm going to jump in with a kind of quick and simple one also. As a GM, honor the dead. Acknowledge it. Don't make a joke of it. Let it be a serious moment in your campaign, in your story, and then move on. What you got next?
Let the roles tell you the backstory. We just went through a long conversation, Jody, about backstories and whatnot, and we don't need to retread all of that, but I do think that it is important to remind folks that you do have these polyhedrals at your disposal. You can use them to tell the story. You can use them to figure out what this character knows about, what they've done in their past. Read the tea leaves, consult the bones, let the dice tell the story.
GMs, last thing that's a big one for me is look for that on-ramp. Start as quick as you can. Find a spot to get that new person so the other characters can go, new character, who dis? And get in the action. All right, friends, as the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in our discussion today that you can take into one of your future games. If you have any questions or a unique experience from your table that you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, head on over to Dungeon Master Diaries on the Shadow Dark Discord channel. Look for links to any materials we referenced in this episode's show notes and thread. And if you'd like to reach out to us directly, you can find Jody on the Shadow Dark Facebook page under the handle Pezman. And you can message Matt via Discord using the handle SCMatt. Until next time, pour one out for the homies.
Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster. And Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production and is not affiliated with the Arcane Library, LLC. Shadow Dark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023.